cold was a living thing in Moscow that winter. It was not the passive absence of heat, but an active, predatory presence. An entity with its own malevolent intelligence that had stalked the city for centuries. It slithered through the triple-glazed windows of the safe house on Kutuzovsky Prospect. A sibilant whisper against the glass that defied modern insulation and mocked the very concept of shelter. It seeped through the thick, coarse wool of Jack Callahan's overcoat, bypassed the thermal layers beneath with contemptuous ease, and settled deep in the marrow of his bones, a constant, aching reminder of his location. The cold was the city's soul made manifest, paranoid, unforgiving, and eternally watchful. He stood by the window, a sentinel in a room that smelled of dust, old paper, and the faint, lingering bitterness of oversteeped Zavarka, the cheap black tea that fueled the nation's anxieties and stained its teeth. The previous occupants had been heavy smokers, leaving behind the ghostly aroma of acrid papyrusy cigarettes, a scent so deeply embedded in the faded, floral wallpaper it felt like a part of the building's very structure, a memory of countless whispered conversations and desperate plans. Through a 2-inch slit in the heavy, moth-eaten curtains, he watched the snow swirl in the jaundiced halos of the streetlights below. The flakes were not the gentle, picturesque dustings of a Christmas card. They were hard, granular pellets of ice, driven by a wind that moaned like a grieving widow around the corners of the monumental Stalinist-era apartment block. Below, the Grand Boulevard, usually a thundering artery of black Zil limousines and government motorcades, was now a hushed, white expanse, its silence more menacing than any noise. The quiet was a canvas, and Callahan knew that any sudden sound would be a splash of unwanted color, instantly drawing the eye of the artist. For the 5th time in as many minutes, he checked the luminous dial of his watch, a Bremont ALT-1C with a hardened steel case and a distressed leather strap. It was a practical concession to his otherwise Spartan existence, but also a relic, a gift from his ex-wife from a lifetime ago where time was measured in anniversaries and school pickups, not operational deadlines and extraction windows. 2:17. The city pretended to sleep, but Callahan knew the silence was a lie. Moscow never slept. It listened. It watched. The SORM 3 surveillance architecture was a digital panopticon, a ghost in every machine, a silent listener on every line. It was an invisible web woven from the fiber optic cables humming beneath the frozen streets to the cellular signals dancing between snow-laden towers. Every keystroke, every call, every packet of data was captured, filtered, and analyzed by the tireless algorithms of the Federal Security Service, searching for the slightest deviation from the norm, the faintest whisper of dissent. On a scarred wooden table beside him, a burner phone vibrated against the wood, a dull, insistent buzz that sounded unnaturally loud in the tomb-like quiet. It was a Nokia 105, a cheap plastic brick utterly devoid of features, chosen for its week-long battery life, its ruggedness, and its complete lack of a digital footprint. It couldn't be tracked by GPS. Its simple operating system was a fortress against malware, and when its operational life was over, it could be dissolved in acid or crushed to dust under the heel of a boot. The vibration was not a call, not a text message, but a single, sharp pulse of data. It was the digital equivalent of a single coded knock on a door. A packet of data, no larger than a few kilobytes, encrypted with a one-time pad whose key was a shared memorized passage from a forgotten novel, was transmitted in a microburst on the 462.5625 MHz frequency. It was a slice of the general mobile radio service spectrum, so cluttered with the chatter of taxi dispatchers and construction foremen that the burst itself lasting only milliseconds, was statistically indistinguishable from background atmospheric noise. Security through obscurity. Across the table, the power light on a small, matte black receiver, an Office of Technical Service designed unit codenamed Nighthawk, flickered from amber to a solid, reassuring green. The signal. Sarah was in place. "Showtime," he murmured, the word a plume of vapor in the frigid air of the room. He had turned the radiator off 2 hours ago, a small act of self-inflicted misery designed to force their bodies to acclimate to the biting cold they would soon face. Complacency was a luxury he could not afford. Comfort was a memory from another life, like the watch on his wrist. Across the sparsely furnished living room, Dr. Aris Volkov looked up, his head snapping around with the jerky motion of a startled bird. He was a ghost long before they planned to put him in a box. His skin was the color of old parchment, stretched taut over the sharp angles of his cheekbones and jaw. His eyes, magnified by thick, wire-rimmed glasses, held the frantic, hunted look of an animal that has heard the wolves circling for too long and knows, with a primal, gut-wrenching certainty, that the hunt is nearing its end. Volkov was a theoretical physicist, a mind so luminous that men in the quiet, carpeted offices of Langley and the Pentagon spoke his name in the same hushed, reverent tones they used for Oppenheimer or Sakharov. His genius was not in bombs, not directly, but in something arguably more terrifying. The guidance systems for Russia's next generation of hypersonic missiles. He had perfected a quantum navigation algorithm that made their new weapon, the Zircon II, effectively unjammable, untrackable, and therefore unstoppable. It navigated not by GPS, which could be spoofed, or by inertial measurement units, which could drift, but by reading the minute, chaotic fluctuations in the quantum foam of space-time itself. It was a weapon that knew where it was in the universe, by feeling the very fabric of reality. He was the Kremlin's crown jewel, and he was about to become America's greatest intelligence coup of the 21st century, if he lived through the next 6 hours. "It is time?" Volkov's voice was a dry rasp, the sound of dead leaves skittering across pavement. His English was precise, the product of a Cambridge education. But the Russian accent was a thick, indelible stain, each vowel heavy with the weight of his homeland. Callahan nodded, turning fully from the window to face the physicist. The room was illuminated by a single, bare 100-watt bulb that hung from a frayed cord, casting long, distorted shadows that turned the space into a minimalist stage for their desperate play. "It's time, Aris. Sarah is in position. The vehicle is ready." He didn't specify the vehicle. He didn't need to. They had gone over the plan a dozen times, each review a fresh layer of terror for the physicist, each repetition a necessary mental cauterization for Callahan. The plan was insane. A Hail Mary pass thrown from his own end zone in the final second of a game they were losing badly. It was born of absolute desperation, because every other option had been methodically, brutally, and personally eliminated by one man. Colonel Ivan Morozov of the FSB's Department of Counterintelligence. They called him Volk, the Wolf. Morozov was old school, a product of the Chekist mentality that saw enemies in every shadow and traitors in every whisper. He wasn't just good. He was an artist of the slow, patient, suffocating craft of counterintelligence. He had dismantled 3 of Callahan's networks in the past 18 months, rolling them up with a chilling surgical efficiency that left Langley reeling and Callahan with a roster of dead or imprisoned assets. The last one, Operation Iron Scepter, had ended with his best informant, a mid-level GRU officer named Yuri, being found in the trunk of a Lada near Domodedovo Airport, a single 9x18mm Makarov round in the back of his head. A classic Chekist execution. Morozov had sensed a bleed, a high-level one, and he had been tightening his dragnet around Moscow for weeks with the patience of a spider sensing a tremor on its web. The airports were watched by more than just customs. The rail stations were wired with facial recognition systems, cross-referenced with no-fly lists. The roads leading to the Finnish and Estonian borders were crawling with patrols and snap checkpoints. Volkov was caged, and Morozov was the one rattling the bars. This left only the unconventional, the unthinkable, the diplomatic pouch. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations was the sacred text of espionage, the fragile gentleman's agreement that allowed spies to operate under official cover. Article 27 was its holiest verse. The diplomatic bag shall not be opened or detained. By custom, this courtesy was extended to sealed diplomatic cargo. That was their loophole, a sliver of light in a tightening dungeon. A crate sealed with the embossed eagle of the United States, leaving the embassy and bound for a C-130 Hercules, waiting at Sheremetyevo International Airport. A crate containing, according to the manifest, a cryogenic freezer for the transport of sensitive biological samples back to the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. The most sensitive biological sample inside would be Aris Volkov himself. Callahan crossed the room, his footsteps silent on the threadbare rug. He placed a hand on the physicist's shoulder. It was trembling violently, a fine, high-frequency tremor that vibrated up Callahan's arm. Aris, look at me. He waited until the man's terrified eyes met his. We have rehearsed this. You know the protocols. We have contingencies for the contingencies. You are not alone in this. Volkov swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his emaciated throat. It is not the plan that frightens me, Jack. I have made my peace with the risks. It is the box, the cold, the dark. He had confessed his claustrophobia months ago during a dead drop exchange, a detail that had sent a jolt of panic through the planning stages at Langley. But there was no other way. It won't be for long. Callahan lied, the words tasting like ash. 6 hours in a coffin-sized freezer, listening to the hiss of your own recycled breath, would feel like an eternity in hell. The suit will protect you. The rebreather will give you air. I will be with the package every step of the way. My receiver will be linked to your biometric sensors. I'll know if your heart skips a beat. He produced a small, flesh-colored transdermal patch from his coat pocket. This first. It's a mild sedative, a cocktail of lorazepam to quell the anxiety, and a beta blocker, propranolol, to keep your heart from hammering its way out of your chest. We can't have you hyperventilating. You'll burn through the oxygen reserve too quickly. Volkov peeled the backing off and pressed it to the side of his neck, his hand shaking so much it took 2 attempts. Next came the suit. It was a marvel of clandestine technology from the OTS labs. A thin, neoprene-like material woven with a microcapillary network. It looked like a diver's dry suit designed by futurists. A small, flat chemical packet filled with a supersaturated sodium acetate solution, when activated by a small electrical charge, would trigger an exothermic reaction, pumping a heated fluid through the capillaries to maintain a core body temperature of precisely 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, even as the ambient temperature inside the freezer dropped to a steady 34 degrees. It was a prototype, tested only in labs with shivering volunteers. Volkov was its first human field trial. As the physicist stripped down to his underwear and began the awkward, humiliating process of pulling on the skin-tight suit, Callahan's mind raced through the labyrinthine details of the operation, codenamed Winter Sleep. It had begun 3 months ago with a brush pass in Gorky Park, a classic piece of tradecraft that felt almost nostalgic in the digital age. Volkov, designated Argus by Langley, had slipped a microdot into the newspaper of a junior case officer. The microdot contained a fragment of his quantum algorithm and a simple, terrifying message. I believe I am compromised. My daughter studies cello in London. I want out. The data was a bombshell. It confirmed the agency's worst fears about the Zircon 2 program. Getting Volkov out became priority 1, a directive that came directly from the Oval Office. The initial plans were conventional: exfiltration through the porous Ukrainian border, a quiet drive to a safe house in Riga, a flight from a private airfield in Poland. Each plan was methodically dismantled by Morozov's tightening surveillance. They saw his teams everywhere. The quiet men in ill-fitting suits who read the same newspaper for 2 hours in a cafe. The nondescript Lada that was always 2 cars back in traffic. The sudden, unexplained internet outages at Volkov's dacha, timed perfectly with scheduled communications. Morozov was playing with them, a cat with a cornered mouse, letting them know he was there, enjoying the chase, savoring the fear he was creating. The freezer idea had been floated by a young engineer in the Office of Technical Service, a kid fresh out of MIT who thought in terms of physics, not spycraft. He called it a thermodynamic stasis exfiltration unit. Callahan's boss, the deputy director of operations, a gruff ex-Marine named Frank Garrity, had called it a goddamn popsicle coffin. But as every other door slammed shut, the popsicle coffin became their only hope. The freezer itself was a custom job, built in a secure, soundproofed workshop in the sub-basement of the U.S. Embassy. On the outside, it was a standard-issue Thermo King industrial unit, deliberately scuffed and dented to look used. But its walls were a layered composite of aramid fibers, non-Newtonian ceramic plates, and a fine copper mesh that acted as a Faraday cage, all designed to baffle standard X-rays and absorb sound. The interior was a cocoon. A false back concealed a closed-circuit oxygen rebreather system, a modified Draeger LARV, the same kind used by SEALs for clandestine underwater operations, good for 8 hours of breathable air. A bank of lithium polymer batteries, flat and dense, powered the heating suit, a suite of biometric sensors, and a tiny, low-power transceiver. The sensors would track Volkov's ECG, blood oxygen saturation, SpO2, and core body temperature. The data would be transmitted in encrypted microbursts to the Nighthawk receiver, now disguised as a pager on Callahan's belt. If any of Volkov's vitals dropped into the red, the pager would vibrate silently, and Callahan would have to make an impossible choice: abort the mission and lose their prize, or risk him dying en route. Volkov was zipped into the suit now, looking like a strange, pale astronaut about to embark on an inner space mission. Callahan helped him with the final piece of equipment: a custom-fitted helmet that connected to the rebreather. It looked like a fighter pilot's mask, sealing airtight around his face. Remember, Aris, slow, steady breaths, like we practiced. The system will scrub the CO2. Don't fight it. Let it breathe for you. Volkov nodded, his eyes wide with a primal fear that transcended language, visible behind the clear visor. Callahan activated the rebreather with a soft click. A low hiss was the only sound as pure oxygen began to flow. He then took a flat, silver dollar-sized disc and pressed it to the side of the helmet. This is your microphone. I can hear you. But do not speak unless I speak to you first. Your voice will be a whisper in my ear. Understand? Another nod, this one more jerky. The Nokia 105 buzzed again. 2 short pulses. Sarah was at the service entrance. It was time to move. "Let's go," Callahan said, grabbing a heavy duffel bag that contained his own gear, including a Sig Sauer P226 Legion. He could feel the familiar, reassuring weight of it in his shoulder holster, the textured G10 grip a solid promise against his ribs. The world is about to get very small for you, my friend. But on the other side is a new one. They moved down the back staircase of the crumbling apartment block, a place chosen for its multiple exits and anonymous squalor. The air in the stairwell was thick and layered with the smells of boiled cabbage, cheap tobacco, and damp concrete. They emerged into a narrow, unlit alley where the wind howled, whipping snow into their faces like tiny shards of glass. A dark blue Ford Transit van with diplomatic plates was waiting, its engine humming quietly, its exhaust a thick white cloud in the darkness. The side door slid open, and Sarah Jenkins peered out. She was young, barely 30, but her eyes were old. She'd cut her teeth in the chaotic back alleys of Beirut and had the calm, steady demeanor of a bomb disposal expert. She was Callahan's best, his right hand. "All clear, Jack. No tails that I could spot on the way in," she whispered, her breath misting. "Swept for bugs twice. We're clean." They bundled Volkov into the back of the van. He moved stiffly, unnaturally in the suit. Callahan climbed in after him, while Sarah got back in the passenger seat. The driver was a Marine security guard, a stoic giant named Gunnery Sergeant Miller, whose neck was as thick as Callahan's thigh. His job was to drive, and if necessary, to fight his way out. He put the van in gear and pulled smoothly away from the curb, tires crunching on the fresh snow. Their destination was the U.S. Embassy on Bolshoi Devyatinsky Pereulok, a fortress in the heart of the enemy's capital. It was the only place they could safely load Volkov into the freezer. But the 5-mile drive was a gauntlet. "Oracle, this is Pathfinder. We are mobile with the package. How are my skies?" Callahan spoke into a lapel mic, his voice low. Oracle was the code name for the signals intelligence team at Fort Meade, monitoring Moscow's electronic ether for any hint of trouble. The reply came as a tinny, synthesized voice in his earpiece, scrubbed of all human inflection. "Pathfinder, Oracle copies. Skies are currently clear. No elevated chatter on Swarm 3 intercepts. Traffic cameras show standard overnight patterns. You are green." Callahan glanced at the small tablet in his hands, displaying Volkov's vitals. Heart rate, 110. A little high, but understandable. Blood oxygen, 99%. Good. He toggled the comms. "Iris, can you hear me?" A faint, tinny voice, distorted by the microphone, whispered back in his ear. "Yes, it is loud in here. The sound of my own breathing, like the sea. Focus on my voice. We're on the garden ring now. Everything is smooth. Just a routine drive across town." As if summoned by the devil himself, a pair of headlights flared in the rearview mirror, closing fast. A black Volga, the unofficial car of the FSB, settled in behind them, maintaining a precise distance of 50 meters. "Gunny?" Callahan's voice was tense, sharp. "I see him, sir," Miller said, his eyes flicking between the road and his mirrors, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He's running our plates now, for sure." "Oracle, I have a shadow. Black Volga, license plate. Sarah?" "Reading it," she said, peering through the side mirror, her voice a low, steady murmur. "Alpha Kilo 779er Mike uniform, 77 region." "Copy that, Pathfinder." The synthesized voice returned instantly. "Running it. Stand by. Plate is registered to a state motor pool, not a known FSB vehicle. Could be a traffic police patrol car. Or it could be Morozov's B team, using a clean car to test our reaction. Callahan muttered. The Volga stayed behind them for 3 agonizing minutes, an eternity in the operational world. Every muscle in the van was tensed. Volkov's heart rate on the tablet spiked to 125, the number flashing yellow. "Aris, breathe," Callahan commanded, his voice firm but calm. "Slowly. In for 4, out for 6. They're just cops. Do not panic. You are safe." Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the Volga signaled and turned off onto a side street, disappearing into the swirling snow. A collective, unspoken sigh of relief filled the van. "False alarm," Sarah said, her voice tight. "There are no false alarms tonight," Callahan replied grimly. "Morozov is hunting. He may not know where we are, but he's shaking all the trees, hoping something falls out." They reached the embassy without further incident. Miller navigated the van into the sterile confines of the underground garage, and the heavy steel doors rolled shut behind them, sealing them inside the sovereign territory of the United States. They were safe for now. The sub-basement workshop was a brightly lit pocket of America, smelling of ozone and machine oil. In the center of the room sat the freezer. It looked innocuous, a simple white box on wheels, but Callahan knew it was the most sophisticated escape pod ever built. 2 technicians from the OTS detachment, both looking impossibly young and serious, were waiting. They helped Volkov out of the van. The physicist stared at the freezer, his new prison, and a violent shudder ran through his body. "It is smaller than I imagined," he whispered. His voice piped into Callahan's ear. "It's built to your measurements, Aris. It'll be snug, but it's safe," Callahan reassured him, though the sight of the coffin-like box made his own stomach clench. They ran a final systems check. The rebreather was topped off. The batteries were at 100%. The biometric feed was strong and clear. The technicians helped Volkov climb inside. It was a tight fit. He lay on his back, his arms crossed over his chest like a pharaoh in his sarcophagus. "Activating the thermoskin system now," one of the technicians said. Callahan watched the tablet. A line graph showing Volkov's ambient skin temperature began to climb slowly, stabilizing at a comfortable 75 degrees. "Aris," Callahan said, leaning close to the opening. "This is the last time we speak until we're on the plane. Once we seal this door, you are dark. No talking. Control your breathing. We are with you. You are not alone." He received a faint, terrified, "I understand." Callahan looked at Volkov's eyes one last time. He saw a man leaving his home, his language, his entire world behind for an idea and the safety of a loved one. It was a leap of faith into a cold, dark box. Callahan gave him a firm nod of encouragement he didn't feel himself. Then he stepped back. "Seal it." The technician swung the heavy, insulated door shut. With a series of loud, definitive clicks, they engaged the 6 locking bolts. They then applied a thick, tamper-evident seal bearing the official crest of the Department of State over the door's seam. Aris Volkov, the man who held the keys to Russia's military future, had vanished from the world. He was now just cargo. Callahan tapped the receiver on his belt. The small screen showed the feed from inside the freezer. Heart rate, 95. SpO2, 99%. Core temp, 98.6, all green. The first phase was complete. The next 4 hours were a blur of tension and logistics. The freezer was loaded onto a standard embassy cargo truck. Miller was behind the wheel again, with Callahan in the passenger seat, his diplomatic passport and the precious manifest in his coat. Sarah followed in a separate decoy vehicle, a black sedan. At 6:30, as the first gray, defeated light of dawn began to stain the Moscow sky, the two-vehicle convoy rolled out of the embassy gates. The journey to Sheremetyevo Airport was 20 miles of pure dread. Oracle, Pathfinder. We are en route to the rendezvous point. Status? Pathfinder, FSB radio traffic has picked up in the last 10 minutes. Chatter is focused on southern transit routes. Call signs associated with Morozov's unit are active near the Belgorod Oblast. The diversion is working. They think he's making a run for the Ukrainian border. Callahan allowed himself a small, grim smile. The diversion had been his idea. The day before, a low-level asset, a man they knew was a double agent reporting to Morozov, had been fed a piece of high-grade false intelligence, a detailed plan for smuggling a person of interest out of the country via a forest tract near the border. They had sacrificed a pawn to protect the king. The truck rumbled on. Callahan's eyes scanned every intersection, every overpass, every vehicle that stayed behind them for more than a few blocks. The pager on his belt was silent. The green light on it blinked with a steady, reassuring rhythm. In the box, Volkov was stable. He was alive. They reached the cargo terminal at Sheremetyevo just after 7:15. The C-130, a hulking gray beast with USAF markings, was already on the tarmac. Its crew performing pre-flight checks under the watchful, resentful eyes of the Russian airport authorities. Miller backed the truck up to the customs warehouse. A stern-faced Russian customs official, a barrel-chested man with a chest full of ribbons and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, approached with a clipboard. "Diplomatikeski Gruz," Callahan said, handing over the manifest and their diplomatic passports. "Diplomatic cargo." The official grunted, his eyes scanning the paperwork. He looked from the manifest to the sealed freezer in the back of the truck, then back to Callahan. His gaze was flat, professionally bored, but his eyes missed nothing. "Biological samples?" he asked in Russian. "Da, for medical research. Very delicate. Temperature sensitive." Callahan replied smoothly in the same language. The official nodded slowly. He was about to stamp the papers when a black sedan with government plates pulled up onto the tarmac, its tires crunching on the icy ground. It stopped 20 feet away. The back door opened. Colonel Ivan Morozov stepped out. Callahan's blood ran cold. The wolf! He was wearing a long black wool coat with a severe cut and a gray astrakhan hat that sat on his head like a crown of frost. The biting wind didn't seem to touch him. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, his pale blue eyes landing immediately on Callahan. He knew. Somehow, he knew. The diversion hadn't fully worked. Or maybe he was just that good. Morozov walked over, ignoring Callahan at first, and spoke in low, rapid Russian to the customs chief. The chief's face paled slightly. He nodded, handed the clipboard to Morozov, and took a half-step back, effectively ceding his authority. Morozov turned to Callahan. He smiled, but it was a chilling, mirthless expression, like a crack in a frozen lake. "Mr. Callahan, an early start to the day. Important business, I trust." "Colonel Morozov, just routine embassy logistics," Callahan said, his voice a marvel of control, betraying none of the frantic alarm bells screaming in his head. On his belt, the pager was still blinking green. Steady. Volkov was unaware of the monster standing just feet from his tomb. "Routine?" Morozov tapped the manifest with a gloved finger. "I find very little about your activities in my country to be routine." You are shipping a freezer, a rather large one, for tissue samples. He said the words as if they were a private, obscene joke. The manifest is clear, Callahan stated, holding the colonel's gaze. This was the endgame, a battle of wills on a frozen tarmac. The Vienna Convention is a remarkable document, Morozov mused. Circling the freezer like a shark, he ran a gloved hand along its side. It protects the sanctity of your correspondence, your work. It is a shield, but every shield can be dented. Tell me, Mr. Callahan, are these samples valuable? All life is valuable, Colonel, Callahan said, the ambiguity deliberate. Morozov stopped and faced him. My government has reason to believe that a person of interest, a citizen of the Russian Federation, a man vital to our national security, may be the subject of an illegal extraction attempt today. My intelligence suggested a land route to the south. A rather clumsy plan, I thought. But I am a man who believes in covering all possibilities, especially when the CIA's Moscow station chief himself is playing delivery boy. His eyes were like ice chips. He knew. He didn't have proof, but his instincts, honed by 30 years of hunting men like Callahan, were screaming at him. You are making a serious accusation, Colonel. One that could have severe diplomatic consequences. Oh, I am aware, Morozov said softly. He gestured to two of his men, who had emerged from the sedan. They were carrying a portable, high-density X-ray scanner, a military-grade device that looked brutally efficient. We have new equipment here at Sheremetyevo, for security, to detect contraband. I would hate for there to be a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can clear this up. A quick scan to verify the contents. If it is just tissue samples, you will be on your way. No harm done. This was it. The moment the entire operation balanced on a knife's edge. The freezer's composite walls might baffle standard airport scanners, but this machine would see the skeleton. It would see the rebreather. It would see everything. Callahan had one card left to play. It was a card of pure, unadulterated diplomatic brinksmanship. He took a step forward, placing himself between Morozov's men and the freezer. Colonel, this is a diplomatically sealed container. It is the sovereign property of the United States of America. You will not touch it. You will not scan it. You will not interfere with its passage. To do so would be a flagrant violation of Article 27 of the Vienna Convention. It would be an act of aggression against my country. I will be on the phone with Ambassador Sullivan and your foreign ministry before your men even plug that machine in. Are you prepared to start an international incident? To have every Russian diplomatic bag from Washington to Warsaw opened and inspected over a box of medical supplies? He held his breath. He was gambling that Morozov, for all his certainty, did not have the political authorization to cross that line. To violate the convention was to invite retaliation. The entire shadow war would lose its unwritten rules. It would be chaos. Morozov stared at him, his jaw tight. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the whine of the C-130's auxiliary power unit. He was calculating the odds, weighing his suspicions against the diplomatic fallout. Callahan saw the flicker of indecision in his eyes. He pressed his advantage. Or, Callahan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, you could let this go, and I will owe you a debt. A piece of information, perhaps. Something you might find useful. About Chechen arms shipments through the Pankizi Gorge. A gesture of goodwill to smooth over this unfortunate misunderstanding. He was offering a trade. A ghost for a ghost. A piece of real actionable intelligence in exchange for the freezer. It was a dirty, cynical piece of spycraft, sacrificing one operation to save another, but it was the only move he had left. Morozov's lips curled into what might have been a smile. He had wanted to catch the man, but forcing the CIA's Moscow station chief to admit a debt was a victory in itself. It was a sign of weakness he could exploit later. He held Callahan's gaze for a long moment, then gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to his men with the scanner. They lowered the device. "I find your offer of future cooperation intriguing, Mr. Callahan," Morozov said, his voice laced with venomous promise. "I will be in touch." He turned to the customs chief. "Their papers are in order. Let them pass." He turned and walked back to his car without another word. As the sedan pulled away, Callahan finally allowed himself to breathe. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature. The customs chief, eager to be rid of the situation, stamped the papers with unnecessary force and waved them through. "Let's move," Callahan barked at Miller. The ground crew, who had been watching the drama unfold from a distance, hurried forward. The freezer was loaded onto a cargo lift and raised to the level of the C-130's open rear ramp. Callahan walked with it, his hand resting on its cold metal skin, as if he could will his own calm to the man inside. Once the freezer was secured to the floor of the cargo bay with heavy nylon straps, Callahan signaled to the loadmaster. The massive ramp began to whine upwards, slowly sealing them inside the belly of the plane. The last thing Callahan saw of Moscow was a sliver of gray, snowy sky. Then the ramp locked shut, plunging the cargo bay into the dim, utilitarian light of the military transport. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "All secure. Flight time to Ramstein Air Base is 4 hours. Welcome aboard." The 4 massive turboprop engines spooled up, the noise building from a deep hum to a deafening roar that vibrated through the floor plates. Callahan felt the plane begin to roll, then accelerate down the runway. He braced himself as the powerful aircraft lifted into the air, banking west, away from Russia. They were out. He waited until they were at cruising altitude and the pilot had confirmed they were clear of Russian airspace. Then he and 2 Air Force medics, who had been waiting silently in the cabin, approached the freezer. "Let's get him out." They broke the diplomatic seal and, with a series of loud reports, unlocked the bolts. They swung the door open. Aris Volkov lay inside, his eyes closed, his face pale and beaded with condensation. For a terrifying second, Callahan thought he was dead. Then his eyes fluttered open. The medics helped him sit up. Callahan reached in and carefully removed the rebreather helmet. Volkov took a deep, shuddering breath of the recycled air inside the C-130, the first free air he'd breathed in nearly 7 hours. "Welcome back to the world, Aris," Callahan said, managing a tired smile. Volkov looked at him, his eyes slowly focusing. "The wolf," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Morozov, he was there. I heard his voice through the casing." Callahan's smile vanished. The freezer's sound dampening was good, but not perfect. Volkov had been awake, aware, listening to his own fate being debated just inches from his head. The psychological toll must have been immense. "He was," Callahan confirmed. "But he let us go. The diversion, the diplomatic pressure. It worked." Volkov shook his head slowly, the medics helping him to his feet and wrapping him in a thick thermal blanket. "No," the physicist said, his voice gaining a little strength. "That is not why he let us go." Callahan frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Morozov is not a man who yields to pressure. He is a man who follows certainty," Volkov said. He looked at Callahan, and for the first time, the fear in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound, weary cunning. He let the freezer go because he knew I was not in it. Callahan stared at him, bewildered. Aris, that's insane. You were in it. I put you in it. A body was in it, yes, the man agreed. But Aris Volkov, the asset, the mind he was hunting, he was already gone. He reached up to his neck, his fingers fumbling with the collar of the survival suit. He peeled it back, and with it, he peeled away the pale, thin skin of his throat. It was a seamless prosthetic appliance. Underneath, the skin was a different, healthier tone. He then reached up and pulled at his hair, which came away in his hand, a perfectly crafted wig revealing a shorter, darker cut beneath. He blinked and removed the contact lenses that had made his eyes a watery, fearful blue. The man who stood before Callahan now was younger, his face harder, his eyes a sharp, clear brown. He was not Dr. Aris Volkov. "Who the hell are you?" Callahan breathed, taking an involuntary step back, his hand instinctively moving toward the Sig Sauer on his hip. "My name is Lieutenant Alexei Orlov," the man said in perfect, unaccented English. "SVR, Director at S, the Illegals Program." He was a deep-cover Russian intelligence officer. A mole. But a mole working for whom? Your SVR? Callahan was reeling, his mind struggling to process the cascading impossibilities. The SVR was Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. Was this an elaborate trap? A Trojan horse being delivered into the heart of NATO? "I was," Orlov corrected, a faint, ironic smile touching his lips. "For the last 5 years, I have been an asset of the British. NC6. Codename, Perseus." It was a gut punch. Callahan had just smuggled one of Russia's most valuable intelligence officers, a British mole, out of the country, believing he was someone else entirely. The entire operation, the months of planning, the risk, the diplomatic standoff. It wasn't for the CIA. It was for the British. "The real Dr. Volkov?" Callahan demanded, his voice a low growl. "Was extracted by an MI6 team across the Norwegian border 2 nights ago, while Morozov was focusing his considerable resources on the fake border run you so kindly and loudly advertised for us," Orlov explained calmly. "The British knew you had a high-risk, high-tech plan in motion for your own asset. They piggybacked. My mission was to impersonate Volkov, to be the bait in your very elaborate trap. If I was caught, Russia would capture one of its own rogue agents, a manageable embarrassment. If I got out, I was a bonus for London. And you, my American friend, you provided the perfect, implausible transport." Callahan felt a cold fury mixed with a sickening dose of humiliation. He had been a pawn. His entire operation, the jewel of his career, was nothing more than a taxi service for Her Majesty's Secret Service. The offer he'd made to Morozov, the intelligence on the Chechens, now seemed like a pathetic, amateurish joke. Morozov hadn't been taking the deal. He had been laughing at him. He let the freezer go because his sources, likely a mole inside the British operation, had told him it was a decoy. He let the small fish go to make the Americans look like fools on the world stage. The C-130 droned on, flying west into the dawn. Callahan looked at the man who was not Volkov, at the empty, high-tech coffin, at the vast, indifferent expanse of clouds below. He had succeeded. He had failed. He had brought a man out of the cold, but it was the wrong man, in the wrong war, for the wrong reasons. The game was deeper, the shadows longer, than he had ever imagined. And somewhere, back in the frozen twilight of Moscow, the wolf was watching them go, and he was smiling. The Cold War had never ended. It had just learned to wear a better disguise.